Hey everyone, glad to be back here as we are joined by Dante Lasting tonight, my former co-anchor on the Buffalo Bills post-game show, as we are just about 1 week removed from the NFL draft. And what a draft it was, Dante. I am really, really happy with how this turned out for the Buffalo Bills because the main thing here is that they added speed, athleticism, versatility, and yards after the catch.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. One thing you didn't mention was depth. They added key depth at key positions on the roster.
Yeah, so we might as well just get right into it. As the first thing I have to say, real quick, is if you were watching the video from last week, I was very, very similar with my last mock draft and how this turned out. And I was pretty proud of myself because that is something that's pretty hard to do. It's kind of like filling out a bracket for March Madness. Props to you if you can get anywhere near that. So I wasn't that close to being perfect player wise. I got 3 out of the 8 players, which is still pretty good. But the main thing that I was impressed with was that I had all 8 positions that I mocked correctly. And that was just after hours of doing research and doing these recordings and all the articles that I wrote for Buffalo Fanatics. And I've just spent so many hours over the last couple months, probably a little bit because, yeah, I love it. And probably just because that's how I fill my free time. You know, some people might play video games. I look at mock drafts. So either way, no matter how you slice it, I'm glad it worked out because, like I said, the Bills added a ton of depth and pretty much my board was their board. And that's pretty cool to think that I was looking at the same numbers, stats, and film that Brandon Beane and company were.
Absolutely. And it shows that you're dedicated to your craft. You spent a lot of time working on that, and it showed in the numbers that you put out.
So, well, I appreciate that. But jumping right into it here, the Bills moved up 2 spots on Thursday night to draft Florida cornerback Kaiir Elam. So this is a move where I was kind of shocked, to be honest, because I was looking at it saying, oh man, I might go 1 for 1 immediately. Andrew Booth is sitting there. But as we found out, Andrew Booth fell to 42 with the Vikings. Now, this is a guy that was mocked at one time to go 12 to Minnesota, but after they traded back with Detroit, he fell all the way to 42. So 30 spots that he fell. And you got to think that there's a reason that he fell. It wasn't just the Bills liked Elam over Booth. I think a lot of these teams noticed something in Andrew Booth where it's like, we got to be cautious with this guy. And I think the biggest factor is he's coming off of the hernia surgery and a quad injury.
Absolutely. Yeah, that definitely scared off teams. And when it came to the Bills, you have Trey White who's coming off of an injury. You don't want that with your rookie cornerback as well. So I think that's why they went with Elam instead of Booth.
Now, Booth was a classic example of scheme fit where he's a great athlete. Now, we don't have his numbers because he was hurt. So he didn't test at the combine or the pro day or anything. So we don't have any official numbers. But he's described as just a big physical athletic corner. So it might be a little bit unfair to Andrew Booth to say that Kaiir Elam is so much more athletically gifted and has so much more upside because we don't know the numbers of Booth. But I think just looking at Elam's numbers, regardless of Booth and how healthy he is or not, Elam is one heck of a player and he has a ton of upside.
Absolutely. I think his upside is what excites me the most because to have a prospect like that, you had in Levi Wallace, he came in undrafted, and so his ceiling was kind of limited. And it's great to the level that he played at, but to have the potential of Elam next to a Tre'Davious White, have that first round chip in your defense, it just elevates your defense so much with that potential.
So the Bills went with the athleticism and the physical traits over the scheme fit here. And looking at some of his numbers, so Kaiir Elam, he's 6'1.5", 191 pounds. His wingspan is 76.5 inches. His arms are almost 31 inches. He has a 37.5-inch vertical jump. His three-cone time was 6.98. His short shuttle, 4.21. And his 40-yard dash was 4.39. And I don't know this off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure I saw somewhere, I think it was on Twitter, that Levi Wallace, that is, his 40-yard dash was in the 4.5 range. So Elam was very much, he tested a lot better than Levi Wallace did, at least in terms of the 40-yard dash.
Definitely. And that's one of the key things that they were looking to add in the entire roster was speed. McDermott said that, Bean said that after the way that last year ended, they were looking to add speed at every position.
Yeah, so looking at one of the things with Levi, I'm sure fans are always going to go back to that 13 seconds, whether that was Levi's fault, the whole defense's fault, special teams, the coaching staff, whoever. The fact of the matter is the Bills let Kansas City tie the game with 13 seconds left, and that's always going to crush Bills fans, the organization, everyone until the Bills can finally win a Super Bowl. But for now, the Bills are moving on from it. And looking at it now, I think that we have one of, if not the most complete rosters in the league after this draft class. And Elam just fits perfectly with what the Bills are trying to do. You look at that defensive backfield, you pair Elam with Trey White, and then Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. That is a really, really strong back four.
I absolutely agree. And Elam might be the one player that I'm most excited to see in training camp. He's been ready to work since he got the call from the Bills. We all saw that. And he asked for the playbook on the plane. So he is ready to come to work, and he's got the smarts. He's got the effort. He's got the energy. And I'm just excited. I know he's going to be a competitor this summer. Jackson versus Elam is going to be one of the best and biggest camp battles this year.
Yeah, so that's the other thing that just screams Buffalo Bills. Like, not only does he have the athleticism, the physical build and the traits and the profile, but he has that willingness to learn and the dedication. When you have a guy that shows up to his combine meetings with the notebook saying like, yeah, I write everything down and I want to learn and I want to get better. And when you show up to the facility and he says, hey, what does Trey White do that I can do better? How do I improve my craft? That's something where Sean McDermott's and Brandon Beane's ears just go out. Like they just perk up at that. They love that. So, and I don't think Elam was just saying that to get drafted. Like, I think he actually means it. And you could just tell that he is so dedicated to getting better. And even if he played more man coverage than zone, and the Bills play more zone than man, it's not like 100 to 0, 0 to 100. But I think no matter what defense the Bills line up in, he's going to be able to transition into the NFL for all those reasons we just listed.
I absolutely. And I think the fact that he went to an SEC school even helps that development even more.
Yeah, and there are a ton of talented receivers in that conference. So that's another thing with Andrew Booth. You say, well, the ACC, that's more of a basketball conference. So maybe the competition wasn't as good as what Elam faced. But Clemson, they're always a tough team. They're in the national championship his freshman year. It's not the best game to go off of if you want to go for some highlights, as Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase went off for LSU. But nonetheless, Clemson has played a lot of tough games, a lot of tough competition. So I still think that Andrew Booth is going to be a very solid player in the NFL, but I'm just very happy, the more I look into this, that the Bills drafted Kaiir Elam.
Absolutely. I mean, he finished his career at Florida with six interceptions in 35 games, added 79 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 26 pass breakups, and a fumble recovery. Now, 6 interceptions in 35 games, those stats don't jump off the board, but the reason those stats might be so low is because he was covering his guy and the quarterback just didn't throw his way. And that's what we see with Trey White on one side. And so having that guy on another side for the Bills defense definitely is an addition.
Yeah, and we talked about the depth with Jackson, and then as we'll get to later on with Christian Benford, now the Bills are starting to get that depth. Because going into it, I was saying, man, I really wish that the Bills would have signed someone, a veteran corner in free agency, someone like a Joe Hayden or an Xavier Rhodes, just to kind of hold up that back end of the defense. Because with Trey White coming off that injury, Levi's in Pittsburgh, you can't go into the season with just Dane Jackson and Cam Lewis. And I think the Bills knew that. I mean, Brandon Beane joked in his press conference that everyone and their brother was telling him that they needed a corner. So the Bills were aware of it. And I think regardless, they were going to take one. But it's just nice to see when you have a guy like Kaiir Elam and then Christian Benford. And now, as we're post-draft here, they could still bring in Joe Hayden or Xavier Rhodes or anyone else for that matter. AJ Bouye's out there, Robert Alford, Kyle Fuller. I'm just throwing some names out there. Some of those guys, like Kyle Fuller, he might try to make some more money elsewhere. But you get the point. There are a lot of veterans that they could still bring in for that depth, that competition, and those camp battles.
Absolutely. One question I have for you. Did you think that the Bills were going to trade up in the first round?
I did, but I wasn't sure how they're going to do it. Now, weeks ago, I was talking about how they could trade up for Sauce Gardner and give up next year's first, maybe AJ Epinesa. But then I was like, I don't think that's going to happen after I heard Brandon Beane say, yeah, I don't sacrifice the future. And he goes, I don't want to say never, but I rarely go all in for 1 year. So I was like, okay, I think I can get rid of that trade proposal. But I was like, if they like someone like Trent McDuffie or Andrew Booth and there's a run on corners, I could see the Bills trading up to 16, 17, 18 and trying to get within that range and take their guy before he's gone. And well, the Chiefs traded up, right? They traded with the Patriots to get Trent McDuffie. And I was like, okay, well, Andrew Booth is still there. And really, I was not even thinking of Kaiir Elam because I wasn't sure if he had a first round grade for the Bills. So when they got to 23, I was just like, all right, Andrew Booth. And even before that, I was thinking he is going to be there. Like, you're going to get a corner at 25. So looking back now, it all worked out, even with giving up that fourth round pick, as we'll get to, because Brandon Beane definitely made up for it in the fifth round. But at the time, I was like, was it really worth trading a fourth round pick just to go up 2 spots? Because I don't think Dallas was going to take a corner.
Yeah, but it makes sense because if Elam's a guy who he's one of the last guys that you have a first round grade on, if you don't go get your guy, then you either settle for somebody in the first round that you don't have a first round grade on, or you trade back. So I appreciate the aggressiveness of going up and getting your guy because he seems to be a good system fit. Now, speaking of trades, let's move on to the second round. What are your thoughts on James Cook?
Love it. Absolutely love it. I was at the Sabres game when it was announced, and I freaked out because minutes later, Owen Power scored to tie the game against Chicago in Rick Jennerad's final game. So that was an awesome span of like 10 minutes for me. And I guess you could extend that to a half an hour because then the Sabres won it in overtime. So that was something that I haven't really felt for Buffalo sports in quite some time. But going back to the Cook pick, I love that because he was my first draft crush, because I think we could all agree that the Bills needed another running back. But I always wanted them to be careful with how they went about it, because I did not want them to draft a bell cow back who was going to demand 20 to 25 handoffs a game, to the point where the Bills would have to change the dynamic of their offense and go from a pass heavy team to a run heavy team, because that's not going to get you to the Super Bowl. You have to be able to throw the ball, as the Bills have proved the last 2 years. And that's their bread and butter with Allen, Diggs, Gabe Davis, as we saw in the playoffs. So the way I saw it was, if you could bring in a running back who can add another element to that passing game while also being able to get some handoffs, that would just make this offense so much better. And the first guy I saw was James Cook. And I saw a thing on him where I can't remember who reported it or what site it was on for the scouting report, but they said he could potentially be the best running back, the pass catching back in the draft. And right when I saw that, I zeroed in on him. And I was like, this could totally be the guy to complement Devin Singletary, because Singletary proved that he can be the first and second down back, but the Bills needed that third down back because Matt Breida wasn't it. Going back a couple of years, TJ Yeldon wasn't it. So the Bills have tried. And Zach Moss, he's not that third down back. He's more that short yardage back, but that's what you have Josh Allen for. So the Bills signed Duke Johnson, and he had a productive year with Miami last year, but he's not the answer to the future. So I love this James Cook pick. I think either Duke Johnson or Zach Moss are the odd man out. I don't know who. I would say Zach Moss, because you signed Duke Johnson for a reason. I could be wrong because Zach Moss is still young and he's coming off that ankle injury, which kind of held him back last year. And now he should be healthy, and they like him for pass protection. But either way, I think the Bills did a great job with the second round pick in James Cook.
Couldn't agree more. They traded back. They got 2 more 6th-round picks, which they used to go get Khalil Shakir in the 5th round, which we'll talk about later. But I really think Duke Johnson is going to be a big influence on James Cook come minicamp, training camp down the line, because even if he doesn't make the roster, there's so much that he can teach Cook. And I think that James Cook just brings yak. And that's one thing that you talked about earlier, yards after the catch. And that's something that the Bills ranked 20th in 2021. And they just needed to get better at it. And so they did in the offseason and they did in the draft. And so I'm excited about that.
And the thing with Cook is he can line up out wide too. Brandon Beane said that he can line up as a receiver and he can go catch passes from those positions. He doesn't just have to line up in the backfield. So that's another element where this is really, really enticing. And an interesting note that I found from Joe Marino on Twitter, for as much as Bills fans wanted Breece Hall, I was like, if he's there, you take him. He's a great running back. He had over 2,000 scrimmage yards. It's something crazy like that. He had over 1,500 rushing yards and a few hundred receiving yards, over 20 touchdowns, just insane numbers. But James Cook averaged more yards after contact than Breece Hall did. And that was the big thing with Breece Hall, his contact balance. So essentially looking at it, with James Cook's 10.9 yards per catch in his career, 4-year career, I think the Bills did great here because they missed out on J.D. McKissick with that whole whatever happened with Washington. So essentially the Bills got a younger and possibly better J.D. McKissick.
Absolutely. I think I don't want to compare him to Alvin Kamara, but I feel like he's going to bring that Alvin Kamara type role and energy to this offense. He appeared in 50 games. He totaled 1,500 yards and 14 touchdowns on 230 carries. And in the passing game, he had 67 receptions for 730 yards and 6 receiving touchdowns. So adding that element along with Diggs, Davis, Isaiah McKenzie, it's just going to be explosive. And I'm excited to see how they use him.
And not only that, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that he's always split backfield duties at Georgia. In his 4 years there, he's never been the main guy. Most notably with DeAndre Swift, and then most recently with Zamir White. So Georgia has a ton of talented, skilled players every year. And James Cook has just been in the middle of that, where he's always had to split duties. And he's never had to be relied upon for 20 to 30 handoffs a game, 5 to 10 catches. He knows his role. And that's what's great about it is he's already been training with Devin Singletary and his brother Dalvin down in Florida. So he's very, very excited to be coming to Buffalo and to play with Josh Allen and Devin Singletary and the rest of the Bills squad. But that's the cool thing. He knows his role. You can give him 5 to 10 handoffs a game and then also 8 to 10, maybe 12 targets in the passing game.
Absolutely. And going off of what you said about him training with Devin Singletary and his brother Dalvin Cook, Elam and Cook, I feel like they're going to translate from college to the NFL so much better because Elam has his dad who was in the NFL and his uncle who was in the NFL, and James Cook has his brother. So just having those bases of knowledge that they can use and tap into, I feel like the transition is going to come so much more quickly than other drafted players.
Yeah, I would agree. So moving on to round 3, this is another pick that I love because at this point I was 2 for 3, almost 3 for 3 if the Bills took Booth instead of Elam, but they got Terrel Bernard, linebacker from Baylor. Now, this was a guy that I didn't see on a lot of boards for Bills fans, a lot of mock drafts. I don't think I saw him once, but I was doing some research on him and I watched some tape and I was like, man, this seems like a guy that's just like a Buffalo Bill. He just seems like another Matt Milano who the Bills would just fall in love with. And I was like, I don't really know if he would have a role on this team right away, but I don't know if he can pass up that athleticism. And pretty much the Bills said the same thing. So Terrel Bernard, he, first of all, has modeled his game after Matt Milano, which is pretty cool because I looked at him and I was like, hey, he looks like Matt Milano. And then you do some more research and it's like, oh, he's actually modeled his game after Milano because they're both about 6'1", 220, 225 pounds, somewhere within that range. And they're both those athletic cover linebackers who can also defend the run too. So Bernard is described as an inside-outside linebacker. Now on the surface, it looks like he's a Milano, I don't want to say replacement, but maybe in this case, an AJ Klein replacement. But the Bills play nickel. So you're left with Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano. So then it's like, well, what about Bernard for this year? Could he take over for Edmonds? And like I said, on the surface, it's like, no. So it's like, are they planning on getting rid of Milano? I don't think so. But Bean cleared that up a little bit. when he said in this press conference he has that inside outside versatility. And just because of his athleticism, they're expecting big things from him, and they can use him in a variety of ways where it's not like he has to be Tremaine Edmonds' replacement. He has to be the new AJ Klein. He has to be the Matt Milano backup and the special teams guy. So I really like this pick, and I think the Bills are going to look very, very smart in, who knows, maybe a couple months this year, but definitely down the road.
Absolutely. And you said it's nice that he doesn't have to be these have to be scenarios. He doesn't have to be the replacement for Milano or Edmonds, but he could be. And he could be a potential replacement for Klein, but it's nice that he could move all over. And that position flexibility is so rare, and it's what the Bills love in a player. I think he's faster than Klein was at his age last year. I think he'll make an impact on special teams. He just needs to add to his frame, which I think he'll do in the coming years. And from all accounts, high character player and a great leader. So just those characteristics screams Buffalo football. And I'm sure that went into picking him in the third round.
And the stat that I love the most, 0 touchdowns allowed in 983 career coverage snaps. So in his career at Baylor, he never allowed a touchdown in coverage. And that's just crazy to think about.
Absolutely. 45 games, 320 tackles, 22 and a half tackles for loss, 12 sacks, 3 picks, 11 pass breakups, and 3 fumble recoveries. Those are just the stats that make you want to just do somersaults for this guy just because he's all over the football.
And then the quote from Brandon Beane was, he's going to be undersized. He's not going to be a prototype size. If he's playing Mike, he's going to be the opposite of what Tremaine looks like inside. But we think he can do both. We like his versatility, super instinctive. And that's the other thing. They said he just has a knack for going to find the football. So sometimes it really doesn't matter how big or small you are, as long as you have those instincts and those physical traits and the athleticism, you can make up for it.
Absolutely. Question for you. Do you think they might use him as like a blitzer, just as he's getting started, just like as a speed guy, go off the edge just to get his feet warm? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm not really sure because, like I said, I think the 2 linebackers are definitely going to be Edmonds and Milano. I think we can scratch the idea of trading Tremaine Edmonds for as much as people are saying that. The draft is over, so you can't get draft picks for him. So I would say that he's just going to be that AJ Klein for now, where he's going to be the first linebacker off the bench. And who knows, maybe if Edmonds gets hurt, I really hope he doesn't, but if he gets hurt, maybe he steps in for Edmonds. If Milano gets hurt, he has an injury history. He always seems to be coming up limp with his hamstrings, although last year he remained pretty healthy. He could definitely come in for Milano. You also have Terrell Dodson, and then we'll get to another linebacker later in the draft, but they re-signed Markel Lee. They have Andre Smith, Tyler Matakevich. So the Bills have a lot of options, and I don't want to say one way or another as to how I see them using Bernard, because he's just so versatile that I don't want to peg him to do one thing. I feel like they would just deploy him in a lot of different aspects. The one thing I will say, though, is with that versatility, I wonder if they're going to use him to cover the big linebackers like Travis Kelce, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry. CJ Uzama is with the Jets. Mike Gesicki got franchise tagged by the Dolphins. And then without looking at their schedule, there's going to be a lot of other big athletic tight ends that he's going to have to cover. So I wonder if they drafted him for that reason, because the Bills have struggled covering Travis Kelce over the last few years.
Absolutely. Use him as a tight end blanket, have that specialized guy in that specialized role. I like it a lot. And it just shows, we were talking about it with corner, just even with linebacker too, how much more depth they have than last year.
Well, speaking of depth, let's move on to the next draft pick. So the Bills did not have their 4th round pick, as we said, but instead they used all that capital as ammo to move back up on day 3. So Friday night was crazy for me. After I got home from the Sabres game, I was just catching up on social media, the draft, writing articles for Fanatics. I barely got any sleep, but I woke up Saturday and I was just like, come on, let's go. Let's bring it. And I was waiting. I was like, could the Bills do something here? Like, they have to trade up, right? They have 4 6-round picks. That's just so much in addition to the 5th round pick. Or did they still have the 5th going into Saturday?
Yes.
Yeah. So they had the 5th, 4 sixths, and then a 7th. So I was like, you have to trade up here. You would be crazy if you don't. So sure enough, the Bills traded that 5th round pick and one of their 6ths for pick 148 with the Chicago Bears. And that's where they took Khalil Shakir from Boise State. And I will let you talk about him a little bit, Dante.
I don't know if you've watched his highlights, but I've watched some of his highlights and just jumps off the page, jumps off the screen. One-handed catches, can just blazing speed. A two-time first-team All-Mountain West Conference receiver. Shakir led the Broncos in receiving each of his last 2 seasons. He was also a team captain. He ranks 5th all-time at Boise State in receptions, 4th in receiving yards, 6th in career games, 6th in career 100-yard receiving games with 10, which is crazy. I think he's going to add another element to this offense, just like Cook. You could have him coming out of the backfield. You can line him up in the slot. You can line him out wide. The possibilities are endless, and I'm excited for the addition of the offense.
Yeah, so at the town hall on Sunday, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I went to the town hall with Brandon Bean, Brian Gain, and Terrence Gray. It was a great event where they held it for club season ticket holders. And fortunately, I was asked to go with one of my dad's friends. So we went and they put food and drinks out, and it was like this whole spread, and it was great. And Maddie Glab was the MC, and she was asking the questions. And I think it was Bean who got this one. And yeah, no, it was Bean, because I took note of this. This is probably my favorite quote that came out of that day that I didn't know before. But he said that they see Shakir as wide receiver 4. So I've been calling a wide receiver 3, where I was saying, okay, you have Diggs, Davis, and then you need that vertical deep threat as wide receiver 3, and then you have Crowder and McKenzie in the slot. But basically, they flip-flopped them. So wide receiver 3 is the slot receiver, because they're going to be out on the field. And then wide receiver 4 is essentially the first backup off the bench. And wide receiver 4 can come in and be that vertical deep threat, or he can come in and play the slot. And I'm going to fault myself here, because going into it, Shakir is another guy that I didn't have on my board, similar to Elam, because I looked and I was like, he's a slot guy. They don't need a slot guy. They just need that speed, vertical deep threat. And I fell in love with Jalen Tolbert. And oddly enough, he went 1 pick before the Bills at number 88 in round 3. So I wonder if that would have changed anything if he was still there. But regardless, the Bills got Shakir. And like you said, I think the opportunities are endless, just based on how Boise State used them and how the Bills can also use them. Because like I said, he could be that vertical deep threat this year, because you have Crowder and McKenzie. You don't want to crowd, no pun intended, you don't want to crowd the slot receiver room. So you think he's going to be that vertical deep threat. But at the same time, due to an injury, maybe you want to use McKenzie, like how you did against New England, just run him in some different routes, get him in with the jet sweeps. You can do that. It's just, there's so many things that you can do with a guy like Shakir now. And if Crowder doesn't resign with the Bills next year, Shakir could be the slot receiver of the future. It all just depends on how the Bills view it and how he meshes and transitions into the NFL.
Absolutely. And I think of a wide receiver like this coming in and having Diggs, Davis, Crowder, Isaiah McKenzie, all these guys, all this knowledge that he can learn from right off the bat in year 1 before he gets going on the field. So I think that's an advantage for him. And just another thing I wanted to bring up is he has return experience in college. So that adds more competition to the return game and potentially another returner for the Bills to use.
And another stat that I love about him, he had the highest PFF grade out of any receiver in this draft, 92.0. That was his career PFF grade. Now, again, that's in large part due to his versatility. So he gets a better grade because he had some rushing yards, return yards, receiving yards, whereas some guys just have the receiving yards. But regardless, to put up that grade for his whole college career and be the highest graded receiver, and to have him fall all the way to day 3, round 5, and still be able to trade up and get him, that's just wizardry by Brandon Bean and the Buffalo Bills, because he said in his media conference and at the town hall that if he was there in round 4 with pick 130, they would have taken him. So now I said at the beginning of this, I was kind of, I don't want to say shocked, but just like, I don't know if I like giving up that 4th round pick for Elam. He probably would have been there at 25. But now, after they did this, hey, that's fine. Everything worked out.
Yeah, he's very calculated in his approach, and that's why I like him so much, because even though he made the risk and he didn't want to give up that 4th round pick, he said after the draft he wished he still had it, but he made moves to pick up more 6 so he could still get his guy on his board. And that is, like you said, wizardry.
So moving on, as the Bills did not have that 5th round pick, but then they still had 3 6th round picks. And this is the fan favorite, the punt god, which, by the way, we should probably find another nickname for him, because he did say he doesn't like it as much as some people may think. Until then, we'll just keep calling him the punt god, or just the old-fashioned Matt Araiza.
Honestly, yeah, we could call him that, but he played all 3 positions, so maybe we should call him the punt and kick god, because
Special teams god.
the special teams god. Yeah, really. His freshman year, he was only kicking. He only started punting his sophomore year. And as a kicker, he made 96 out of 97 extra points and had a 73.5 field goal percentage. So not only is he a great punter that can boom punts 80 yards, he can also kick for you if you need.
Yeah. Now, the only knock on him, I mean, there might be a couple small knocks. I've seen like how he holds the ball, how he drops it, the distance from the drop from the ball to his foot, the angle, all that stuff. But the main thing that I saw is that he doesn't hold, or at least he hasn't held in a college game. But he did say that he's been working on it with professionals right along. And I don't want to speak too much on it without actually knowing, without actually doing it. But it seems like that's something that you can pick up pretty easy in training camp, where it's like, okay, just catch it, hold it, spin it, like catch, spin, hold. Now, it's a lot harder than it looks, and there's going to be a lot of pressure, and especially in the cold Buffalo conditions, it's going to be different. But I think that's not even a question that Matt Araiza is going to make this team over Matt Hawk. I just don't see Matt Hawk making this team, because of his holding abilities, over a guy who can kick 85 yards.
I absolutely agree. And that's one of the things that I wanted to bring up is we'll have to see how consistently he holds throughout training camp. And if it's not an issue, then I can definitely see him winning the punting job. But that is definitely going to be one of the things to watch as the summer goes on. One thing about Araiza, according to CBS Sports, they had his pro comparison as Pat McAfee. That's a pretty good comparison. His strengths, they said, special talent for a specialist, viewed as a top 100 pick by some NFL teams. Multiple 80-plus yard punts during the 2021 season, and also kicked field goals, and he converted a 53-yarder. He didn't have a single punt or kick blocked, can kick off as well, and he ran in the 4.7s at the combine and is an additional player on coverage team because of his speed and athleticism. Now, being said after the draft that they're going to have to rein him in because he's so aggressive and he'll go out and he'll tackle on special teams, which is great to hear for a punter. So he's got kicking, coverage specialist, kick. He's got everything that you would want in a special teams player. And it's such a value to get somebody like that in the 6th round.
And that's the thing. He fell to the 6th round. Now, granted, it was the first pick of the 6th round, but he was a 3rd punter off the board. And now, like you said, he was projected to go, I saw, as high as round 4, and that's when the punters started going. The Ravens took Jordan Stout from Penn State at 130, and then I believe it was 133, 3 picks later, Tampa Bay took Georgia's Jake Camarda. But regardless, you have 2 punters taken 130, 133, and then Cade York was taken by the Browns shortly after. You have 3 specialists, and Araiza's still sitting there, and he falls all the way to 180. And that was another pick where I mocked the Bills taking him at 168. So I only was wrong by 12 spots, but that was because of the trade. I think if he was there at 168 and the Bills had that pick, I think they still would have taken him there. So the Bills are very lucky that he fell as far as he did. And I'm still a little surprised that teams, for whatever reason, whether it was his holding abilities, I saw something, maybe he has like thin ankles or something. He punts in San Diego State. So maybe that wouldn't transition well to these colder weather cities. I don't know. But to fall all the way to the 6th round, another great job by Brandon Beane.
Absolutely. First player in program history to be named unanimous first team All-American. That's crazy. Set FBS records for single season punt average, 51.4, 60-yard punts with 18, and 50-yard punts with 39. So he can definitely boot it. And the fact that he can contribute in the kicking game as well, if Tyler Bass tweaks something or if he goes down, oh, God forbid that doesn't happen, but we saw it in the Bills-Panthers game. They lost their kicker before the game, and they were totally hamstrung for it the rest of the game. So to have a backup kicker and a punter, that's so much versatility, and it goes back to what the Bills love, position versatility.
So going to round 6 now, I like this pick too. Now, here's the only little difference that I had with my mock draft. I had the Bills taking a safety just in case for Jordan Poyer insurance, but I think this is good news for the Poyer front because the Bills didn't really draft a safety. Now, Christian Benford, he's listed as a corner from Villanova, but he has experience on the outside, on the inside as a nickel corner, and then also on the back end as a safety. So another guy with that athleticism, versatility. He's described as a big physical defensive back. But I think for the fact that they didn't draft that prototypical safety, someone like a Tyson Anderson or a Sterling Weatherford who was on my board, actually Weatherford might be more of a hybrid. But regardless, I think this is good news for the Jordan Poyer front.
Definitely. And like you said, it screams versatility. It's just, it seems like this whole draft, they got players that could fit either way. Bean said they would start him at corner. They can move him back to safety. When you have position flexibility like that, it makes it easier on the coaches to mix and match players and move them in different positions and see where they fit best.
Now, the stat that I found that really impressed me was that quarterbacks last year had just over a 25 passer rating when targeting Benford in coverage.
Wow. That's crazy. I mean, yeah, over 4-year career, he had 137 tackles, 14 interceptions, and 14 passes defense. This kid knows how to get around the ball. He knows how to take away the ball, and he knows how to swat down the ball. So definitely a value add in the 6th round for the Bills.
And I think this is a guy that's going to add that depth and the competition on the back end of the corner roster. You look at guys like Cam Lewis and Nick McLeod, Elijah Griffin, Tim Harris. The Bills aren't going to keep all of these cornerbacks. I think every year they keep about 4 outside corners, and then you still have Taron Johnson and Saran Neal in the inside on the slot. And then they usually keep 4 safeties, 2 backups for Poyer and Hyde. So I see this where it's probably going to be 4, maybe 5 boundary corners, where it's going to be Trey White, Kaiir Elam, Dane Jackson, and then is it going to be Christian Benford? Is it going to be Cam Lewis? Is it going to be Nick McLeod, who seems to have some promise? So I don't know. Do you see them keeping more than 4 outside corners? Or do you agree that it's going to be 4 no matter what? And then the rest, maybe to the practice squad, maybe they're just going to have to find new homes.
I think it's going to be 4 no matter what. With all the additions they made for the defensive line, I think they want as many defensive linemen as they can on this roster to have that rotation that they love so much. I think the cornerback battle, like I said earlier, is going to be one to watch, not even for the top positions, but even at the bottom positions for that depth. Because you have all those guys competing for such little spots, it's going to be a great competition this summer.
Yeah, so I could see it where Benford, based on his upside and that athleticism, I could totally see him beating out Cam Lewis and the rest of the guys that I mentioned. And a guy like Cam Lewis and Nick McLeod would find themselves back on the practice squad. But that's a case where Cam Lewis did come up. He played some valuable minutes for the Bills last year. A team could poach him off the roster just like Rashad Wildgoose last year. But on the flip side, if you put Benford on the practice squad, the same thing could happen where I think it was the Jets that took Wildgoose, and then it's like, we really like this guy, but unfortunately we didn't have a roster spot for him, but that's the chances you have to take, and now he's gone. So in that case, I would think that the Bills would rather lose a guy like Cam Lewis than Christian Benford, just based on the upside and the athleticism and the versatility and what they already know about Cam Lewis and what he can be and what is still to come for Benford.
Absolutely.
So with the last 2 picks, I was ecstatic when I saw this. Again, a little bit out of order, but I was texting my friend. I said, I'm going to freak out if the Bills draft an offensive lineman and a linebacker here because those are the last two positions. So they did just that, but out of order. So instead of taking the linebacker first, they took the offensive lineman. They took Luke Tenuta, a tackle from Virginia Tech. He's described as a swing tackle. He's 6'8". He's huge. He seems like a bit of a project, though. Would you agree, Dante?
I would agree. Yes. I would say that the Bills like their offensive lineman tall as hell, as you said, at 6'8", but he can play many positions. And again, that versatility, I think that's the word of the day for me. That versatility is
Can we get a coin jar? Every time we say versatility and athleticism, we can put a nickel in there. I think we're going to be rich by the end of this.
I think so. But he started 11 games at left tackle, 9 games at right tackle. In his career, he had 14 games at right tackle and 12 games at left tackle. So he has been all over. He can back up at many different positions. But like you said, I think he's going to be a bit of a project. And for the Bills, I think that's okay. For a 6th-round pick, you can spend some time on a project and you can see where he develops under new offensive line coach.
I think this is a good time to look at the depth chart because I think it gets pretty interesting here because the Bills did a great job with building up their offensive line throughout free agency. And I was conversing with some people on Twitter leading up to the draft, and they were saying, no, the Bills need to get that insurance. You need to get an offensive lineman. Not need, but you should get an offensive lineman kind of early in the draft because Roger Saffold is getting up there in age. He's only here on a 1-year contract. He could get an injury. And then what do you have? Like Butker, he might start the year on the PUP list. He's coming off that, ACL tear?
Yes.
So I understand, but based on my board and the value that I saw, I was like, I think day 3 is where you can get that depth for the O-line. Because if you missed it, I was saying leading up to the draft, you want to get those skill positions first. You want to get that dynamic high-end talent that you don't have to worry about paying for at least 3 or 4 years. Because corners and wide receivers, those are other than quarterbacks, those are probably the highest paid positions now when a guy like Christian Kirk is making almost $20 million a year. If you can draft someone like, I'm just going to throw a name out there, the Lions traded up for Jameson Williams, that's great. Because why spend $20 million on Christian Kirk when you can go draft Jameson Williams and get him in on a cheap rookie deal and don't have to worry about re-signing him for 3-4 years? Now, I will say some of these guys are getting greedy to the point now where they don't even make it through year 3. Well, I guess they did in this case, but like Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown, where they're like, okay, show me the money, come on. And it's like, dude, come on, play out your rookie deal before you get too greedy. But nonetheless, you get that high-end talent for a very cheap deal. And then based on my board, I had running back high, linebacker, the punter, just because the punt god. And then I found day 3 as that sweet spot for the offensive line. So I'm glad that they chose to address it when they did. The only thing that I will say is they have another tackle. So I thought that they were going to get an interior offensive lineman. I had Josh Sills or Josh Rivas with Kansas State. Rivas with Kansas State, Sills with Oklahoma State. I thought those were 2 guys that just kind of reminded me a lot of Wyatt Teller, a similar day 3 pick, especially Sills with how he played. But looking at the depth chart now, so from left to right, it's going to go Deion Dawkins, Roger Saffold, Mitch Morse, Ryan Bates, Spencer Brown, assuming that our projections are correct here. And then outside on the tackles, now he's a swing tackle, David Kessenberry. They signed him from the Titans. So you could line him up at left tackle, right tackle, either way. For this, we'll just say left tackle because you have Tommy Doyle at right tackle. And then you have Luke Tenuta. And then you have the infamous Bobby Hart, too. And then they have Alec Anderson listed on here. I'm looking at our lads. He was an undrafted free agent. So then on the inside, your backup left guard is Ike Butker. Your backup center is Greg Mance. And then your backup right guard is Cody Ford. And then Jacob Capra is there, too. So I think if there's still a position to address, it could be that interior offensive line. But nonetheless, I think the Bills have done a great job of building up that line.
Absolutely. I would say I completely agree with you looking at this depth chart that in that interior, I think the depth could be stronger. But I think that's one of the positions as they get into camp and maybe training camp as players get released or somewhere down the line, I think they could bring in some veteran depth at that position.
Now, a guy that I was doing some research on, Michael Schofield from the Chargers, he just seems like a perfect Buffalo Bills player. He seems like another Ike Butker. You can line him up at either position, left guard, right guard. He can be a backup. He can come in and give you some valuable starts if you need him to. And I don't think that he would be pressing for a starting role, especially at this stage of his career. I think he had a pretty good PFF grade. I believe it was in the high 60s, only allowed a couple sacks and a couple penalties. And by a couple, I mean 2 or 3. So I think that's a guy that we could see. The Bills have, I believe, over $5 million in cap space. I saw Sal Capaccio tweeted that a couple days ago, and I don't think they've done anything with that since. So I think the Bills have a little over $5 million. That's a spot where I could see them addressing still. Wide receiver, corner, maybe they want another veteran. I see a guy like T.Y. Hilton. Maybe you get him in on a cheap veteran deal. Could be that vertical deep threat. Corner, someone still like Joe Hayden or Xavier Rhodes. But either way, I'm very happy with this Bills roster now. But I'm just throwing some names out there who we could still potentially see come off the board.
Absolutely. And I think what the Bean did with this draft is he shored up those positions so he doesn't have to go out and risk and spend that big money to fill more holes. I think this draft, he filled a lot of holes. And now if he needs to go out and get those veteran pieces for depth or other reasons, it's not as much of a pressing need.
And then the one last draft pick that I don't want to just glance over here, it was Baylen Spector, who I think this is a lot better of a pick than people are thinking, especially me at first, because again, I was thinking that you could get a Tremaine Edmonds replacement in round 6. I had Jack Sanborn or Aaron Hansford going to the Bills in round 6. And those are 2 guys that I had seen go all the way as high as round 3 and then all the way as low as being an undrafted free agent, is which we saw. So I thought that for sure the Bills would get someone like a Matt Milano, AJ Klein on the outside, and then that traditional prototypical run stuffing middle linebacker, just in case they can't re-sign Edmonds. But Spector is another guy that they're saying he has an inside-outside versatility. He's not your prototypical middle linebacker, but he can line up at either spot and give you some valuable minutes.
Absolutely. And you see with that Clemson defense, that's a champion. I don't know about last year, but in the past few years, it's been a championship level defense. So him being a part of that, he'll bring that either to competing for depth or just his attitude overall. He has 2 years of starting experience at Clemson. He started 10 games in 2020 and 10 games in 2021. He played in 53 games during his 5 seasons at Clemson, 210 tackles, 22 tackles for loss, 9 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, and an interception. So he has the stats to back up those starting projections.
And the quote that Brandon Bean gave on Spector was, he can play inside, he can play out, should help us on special teams, smart, tough kid. Had some good years at Clemson. He's going to bring a little edge to us. I like the depth we've added to that linebacker room. And one other thing that I want to add here is that Spector had the highest RAS score out of any Bills draft pick. Now, RAS is what we were talking about earlier with that relative athletic score. And looking at it here, the Bills had, let's see, an average of, I don't have the original tweet here, but I do have their score where it ranked 13th in the league. Now, going based off of this, I think they used their combine results because Tenuta's score was only a 4.72. He retested for his pro day, and he got that all the way up to a 9.09. So talk about a huge improvement. So that 13th ranking in the league, that's going to skyrocket after you factor that in. But their relative athletic score is in order here. So Elam had a 8.65, Cook 8.76, Bernard 8.88, Shakir 8.32, Araiza surprisingly 9.49. So I said Spector. Really, Araiza had the highest relative athletic score, but for positions, skilled positions, I guess, because Araiza's a punter,
Hey,
it was Spector.
special
But
teams are people too.
Yeah. Benford had an 8.15. Tenuta went from a 4.72 to a 9.09, and then Spector had a 9.14. So that's been the theme of the night: speed, athleticism, versatility, and like I said earlier, yards after the catch. But this is one of the most athletic drafts that I've seen Brandon Beane put together.
Absolutely. And I'll add one more to your list, like I did to start off the show: value. Bean got a lot of value for many of these picks. And I think that's just another notch in his belt as a Bills GM.
Yeah, I love this draft for him. I mean, there are a couple spots here and there where, like I said, oh, you're drafting him. You're drafting James Cook in round 2. Oh, okay, I had him in round 3, but hey, if he's there, take him. Bernard, oh, he's round 3. I had him in round 4. Okay, if you like him that much, take him. You're taking another outside linebacker. Well, okay, you said he can play inside or outside. I didn't see him on any boards, but I trust you more than I trust me. So that's where I'm at with this, where my initial reaction might have been, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that. But the theme of all this, for me at least, is every time I see a Bills draft pick that I don't know too much about, like Shakir. Like, yeah, I've seen him, I've heard of him, I've seen some stats here and there. But the more you look into him, because you can always learn more, with all these draft picks, the more I look into them, the more I love them. And I'm just like, man, I'm so happy that we have Brandon Beane, because Doug Whaley, I don't mean to throw him under the bus, but any of our former GMs, they might just look at that and say, oh, we'll just get him because he plays at Alabama and he has some good numbers and he's played tough competition. But Beane and his staff, they'll go after a guy from North Dakota State who has to face that adversity, and he has to deal with handling the pressure and trying to transition into the NFL. Guys that have the chip on their shoulders. Someone like Baylen Spector, yeah, he played at Clemson, but no one had him on their boards. And I don't want to say no one, but a lot of people didn't. So he's going to come to Buffalo with a chip on his shoulder because he's probably thinking, hey, I was a 7th-round pick. Whether you had me on your board or not, I wasn't too high on anyone's board. I wasn't projected to be a 1st or 2nd-round pick, and I thought I was pretty good at Clemson. So I'm going to try to come in, and I'm going to beat Markel Lee for that backup linebacker spot. I'm going to beat out Terrell Dodson. I'm going to beat out Tyler Matakevich. So that's what I love about these draft picks, in addition to all those physical traits that we talked about.
Absolutely. Adversity breeds competition. It really does. And like you said, going back to just how being drafted, it's team fit, how they fit with the team over whatever school they went to. Like that doesn't really matter that much. And I think that all these players really fit Buffalo Bills football.
So just to close it out, do you think that there are any more signings that we're going to see? Talked about Joe Hayden, Xavier Rhodes, maybe a T.Y. Hilton, just another veteran receiver. Honestly, I'm happy with the Bills team the way it is, but I would still entertain another player. Probably my top position right now would be that interior offensive line, just because we've seen Cody Ford. He can be a liability when he's on the field, but I think with Aaron Cromer, he can get him back to being that mauler that he was, that 38th overall pick when they got him from Oklahoma, because he has not lived up to expectations. But I think a fresh start could do Cody Ford well. But at the same time, I would like to have a little bit more insurance there.
Absolutely. I could see that position. I could also see, going back to corner, I saw that James Bradbury might be released soon. And if he is released, I feel like the Bills are a big destination for him. Bean drafted him in Carolina, and McDermott coached him his rookie year. So you have that familiarity. If they want to add a veteran corner, they might have the opportunity to, if the Giants release him.
Do you see Bradbury as maybe, I don't want to say ruining the Bills team, but not necessarily fitting in now with Elam? Because I feel like the Bills also wouldn't want to ruin the growth and development of Kaiir Elam and Dane Jackson, because they are very high on those two guys. And I feel like if you bring Bradbury in, he's going to want to start. So it's going to be Bradbury and Trey White on the outside, assuming Trey's healthy. And then you kind of, again, I don't want to say ruin, but you kind of slow down that development for Elam and Dane Jackson for that matter. Now, I know you want depth and you want to be the best you can, but how do you think the Bills would balance bringing in that veteran talent while also trying to let their young guys grow up?
I think the team would add Bradbury if White is not ready to go in the beginning of the year. If they know that he's not going to be either at full health or able to play in the beginning of the year. Sign a guy like Bradbury, he can fill in until White's ready to go, and then he can fill in elsewhere throughout the rest of the season. But like you said, I think that a signing like that could dampen the development of those two younger corners.
Yeah, that's why I'm almost leaning more towards someone like a Joe Hayden or an Xavier Rhodes, even AJ Bouye, like I mentioned earlier. Who's someone else that I'm thinking of? Chris Harris Jr. is out there. I don't think they would want to go that route, but just someone that's on the back end of their career and they know that they're not a starter anymore and they're happy with being a backup. Because yeah, Hayden put up some strong numbers last year. I mean, all these guys did, but I think they all know that their prime is over. So if you could bring in, let's see, out of all those guys, who do you think would fit the Bills the most in terms of knowing his job and not pushing for playing time and understanding that you're going to be behind Kaiir Elam and maybe even Dane Jackson based on how high the Bills have him on their board?
I could see Joe Hayden fitting into that role. He's played golf with Von Miller a couple times. If he wants to chase rings, potentially, I think that this would be a good spot for him.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I feel like as much as Hayden knows he can still play, I think he wants a Super Bowl. I mean, he's played in
Cleveland,
what are
Pittsburgh.
yeah, what are those cities called? Like the blue collar cities, but it wasn't there a name for like that whole strip of Buffalo, Cleveland, Pittsburgh? Is it like the Iron Cities, the Rust Belt, something?
The Rust Belt. That's it.
Okay, yeah. So he's been in like those blue collar cities, especially with Cleveland. He struggled all those years. They never really won anything there. He goes to Pittsburgh. They've had some nice years, but they've never won a Super Bowl. Going to Buffalo would kind of encapsulate the whole thing. That would just top it off. Win a Super Bowl with your buddy Von Miller, make friends with everyone else, and ride off on a high note.
Speaking of riding off on a high note, I think we've covered everything that we need to based on the draft.
I think we will ride off on a high note on that note. So thank you for tuning in once again. Glad to have Dante back with us as he gave us some in-depth analysis and helped me out because as much as I've been doing it on my own the last few weeks here, it's definitely nice to have another voice and another mind to share your ideas with. So, I mean, that's pretty much it for now. If we can come up with another video to make here and talk about maybe if there's a Joe Hayden signing, something else goes on, the schedule is coming out, got OTAs, rookie minicamp. We're out of the thick of the off season. So the main videos that we were making here, we talked about free agency, leading up to the draft, and then after the draft. So this might be it for now. You might see us again, but either way, thanks for watching and go Bills.
Go Bills.